Recording started.
Hello and welcome to Art History Tuesday on December 11th. This happens to be my power day and my birthday, and I'm really excited to be here and go through a little bit of art history that I feel like should do more discovery. So it's lined up quite well. Okay, this is a very big question. To answer this question, you can write a thesis. But what is the cultural significance of time? So you can also rephrase that into, how is time important to a culture? That's similar. And then you can just tell me anything that comes off the top of your head. It doesn't have to be deep. Yeah, definitely. The history of a people, area, nation over time can affect the culture. Exactly. And how we record time also tells a lot about a culture, right? So we are going to be looking at a device that definitely records time. Before I dive into what all this is, give me your best guess. And Elizabeth, why don't I let you do, let's see, the middle and the bottom one, and I'll write the top. Give me your best guess as to what you think this is. All you know is that this is a form of measuring time. We're trying to figure out what these individual elements are. Not about being right or wrong, just trying to come up with something that would make sense. And then that bottom one, as you can see, is pointing to some little design in one of those rings. This is kind of what it feels like to be an archaeologist or an anthropologist when you see an artifact for the first time and you haven't asked anybody what it is. You're first going to try and surmise what you think it could be. And it's interesting how often we are right. Yeah. Exactly. So that's what we think here. So these big sort of arrow-looking pieces on the left, right, top, bottom, and there's different sized ones going around. We think this is some sort of a divider. Yes, this is a Mayan sun calendar. Excellent. Yeah, this is a sun or a god that you see in the center. And then lastly, we are seeing little sort of hieroglyphs here symbolizing different sorts of increments. So we already have multiple ideas of what's going on. Before we dive into the Mayan sun calendar, which you have so cleverly guessed, Elizabeth, do you have any questions before we start? Anything that I should start with? This is an interesting thing. Cool. So unlike our other pieces of work, which have kind of been specific, we're just talking about the Mayan sun calendar in general, in which, if you can imagine, there are thousands made. I'm turn my video camera on. So today I have a very cinnamony and clove-based tea, so it's a little spicy, which is exciting. I put some honey in it, and it kind of took out some of the kicks, so I'm a little bummed at myself for that decision. But anyway, so the tea I'm spilling on this piece today actually has a lot to deal with math, a very math-based culture, which surprises people today. Now before I start, I have actually worked with the Mayan community 6 times now through a nonprofit enrichment that's connected with a nonprofit in Guatemala. And so this is A lot of this information I'm giving is a little bit more interview-based that I've had with some other specialists, and some parts of it are anecdotal. Okay, so the Mayan calendar. So let me ask you a question first, because we have a hard time in history understanding, I think, ancient history versus modern day. So I've already told you that the Mayan people obviously still exist. I'm going to ask you, just to get an idea, and I know, Elizabeth, you're already quite worldly. We don't really talk about a lot of the Mayan population today. So I'm going to ask you, how many languages do you think still exist in the Mayan communities? Can you just give me a number? How many different languages do they have? Over 20 still exist today. And if I were to pull up a map, you would see that the Mayan communities really are kind of a hub in Guatemala, which is right in between North and South America. It's that connecting sort of, not a slip, but a quite large amount of land. But I think it's really, if you were to compare it to a state in the U.S., it's kind of close to the size of West Virginia. So the populations exist mostly in Guatemala, and it's been upwards even into the south of Mexico, and then downwards into a little bit of South America. So this gives you a frame of reference. They're almost completely rural, and they are deeply linked still today with the colonization that happened in Latin America. And most of their narrative is still linked to that story as well. But they are still a thriving community in which actually most of the cultural customs are in fact kept by the women. And then it's a re-emerging thing right now for the men to start exploring their side of the culture too. So even if you walk into the community, you'll see that most of the women are dressed in a somewhat traditional dress of like woven fabrics and belts and hairstyles. And the men, they'll look largely like any other man in Latin America, wearing like Abercrombie reject line t-shirts and then denim jeans or something. And that's the whole different concept right there as to why things have lost. So this is kind of true to a lot of cultures that have been colonized around the world. Women tend to be the holder of customs, and then men, because of how the culture is divided going into the workforce, have to have a division in some way. I worked with women who actually were originally cooking over pit fires in their house, and that's like, if you imagine, it's fun to camp and cook over a fire every day, but it's actually terrible for you to grow up like that. They have a really high, cultures that have that today still have a really high death rate for the old and the young. It's like equals to smoking 10 packs of cigarettes a day, at least, just in terms of inhaling smoke. So I worked with a nonprofit that brought in stoves into the community, and then thus it freed up women's time because they didn't have to tend one fire all day, and they asked women what they wanted for their community, and so women actually, believe it or not, one of the first things on the list was asking for art in the schools because their kids didn't have that. And today, the Mayan community, there are actually several communities that have all Mayan schools who are teaching their own Mayan dialect and history in that school, which is a big deal because beforehand they were just learning the history of Spain and Guatemala, but not any of their own history. So going into that own history, one of the roles that is still carried by a Mayan priest, which is actually normally a male role, to have a male priest. They do have women priests as well, but there is mostly a male-dominated role. The Mayan priest is also called the day counter. And that's because the Mayan calendar is so complex that you need to have this person with a specific job to count those days. Because the average person is not like our Gregorian calendar that was founded in like the Middle Ages. It's much more complicated to calculate. However, it is actually more accurate. And I'll give you an example. The Gregorian calendar is inaccurate. And if it weren't for one day we had every 4 years, the seasons would have slowly shifted throughout time. And what is that day that we have every 4 years? Leap day, right. So that leap day, this is a very Western way of thinking, right? Our calculation isn't exactly perfect. You can't just have a quarter day every year. So every 4 years, we'll just stick a new day in, and everything will even out. It's a very Western concept. It wasn't until the interaction in the Middle Ages with the Arabic world, the West did not have a concept of zero. But the three cultures that did have the number 0 in their calculations were Arabic, Chinese, and Japanese as well, but they're Japanese technically derivative of Chinese system, and then Mayan. So these are the three cultures in the world that invented the number 0. And weirdly, it's actually at around the same point in history, which is kind of blows us away. So the Mayan system is very, very based in math, to the point that you can see it throughout the entire body. For example, what do we use to count on our body in the West? You're taught this when you're little, and then you have to be untaught it as you get into tests and stuff. Our fingers, right? Our fingers are exactly how we are taught to count in the West. And therefore, because of how many fingers we are born with, what is our base system? And you actually said this number earlier. 10, right. So everything that we count is in tens. Now, in the Mayan cosmology, they actually include their fingers and their toes when they start counting, when the little kids start counting. Therefore, everything is base what? 20, right. So we count 10, 20, 30, 40. And even in the woven patterns today in these Mayan communities, women actually count 20, 40, 60, 80. That's just kind of the beginning. And imagine how much quicker you get into the higher numbers once you break 100. And even how you count on your hand, it's believed in Mayan cosmovision that if you count with both of your hands, you're actually taking over both sides of your brain. So I've seen women do patterns in math where they're counting with only one hand, and you're counting like this. So there are several sacred numbers that we see here. You can see that they're counting like this right here. It's wild to watch because it just looks like this when we're working out like a math or a pattern problem. So a little bit more into this, and I know math is not so exciting, but it is exciting when you see it in a cultural context. Going into this, another sacred number, so 20 is a sacred number, I'm writing down notes. And another sacred number, oh yeah, really? Yeah, high-level math and art actually have incredibly strong crossover, and even low-level math, like base geometry. I know so many people who are like, I'm an artist, I'm not good at math, but every artist I know definitely incorporates math. And even in simple ways, like they're building a canvas or they're building a sculpture. You have to kind of quantify and add things up, and you do things without realizing it. So we have two sacred numbers here, 20 and another sacred number, which is funny because it's very like a bad vibe in the West, but 13 is the second sacred number. So 20 is 13. In the Mayan calendar, there are 20 months in a year. So we have 12, there's 20. But not all the months have the same amount of days, like the Gregorian calendar, except the shortest month has 13 days. So they have some very short months, and then they have some months that are almost as long as ours as well. There's also not a believing of an end. So this really kind of correlates to the religious belief as well. And some of the brutal sort of sides of history that we've heard about of the Mayan populations kind of correlate to this belief structure. So 20 times 13, these are, you want to give me that number? You want to do the math for me, Elizabeth? What's 20 times 13? 260, right. And How many days do you think are in a lunar year, so a solar year, one guided by the moon? Yes, exactly. So the Mayan calendar is an intense system because one calendar calculates the solar year, the lunar year, and as well as the overall time count. So it counts years as well, which is why they need to have a specific person with who has this job as a day counter, because they are moving these giant structures around to calculate things. Very specific, but they don't have any need of a leap year because they've made some months so short and some months so long. And what's really important, and I'm going to bring this back to 2012, which was 6 years ago for you guys, so you guys were probably in elementary school, right? I'm guessing 2nd and 3rd grade if you're in high school right now, if you're in 9th grade, maybe a little bit older. Yeah, 3rd grade. All right, do you remember what was happening around New Year's in 2012? There's some people freaking out. No, okay. So 2012. This is funny because it's like no freaking out, but I remember from 2010 or 2009, people were talking about this nonstop. In 2012, people believed the world was going to end because the Mayan calendar, they said, was going to run out of years. It was going to stop. Now, obviously, we're all here now. The world didn't end, but this was pretty huge. It crossed a lot of the world. Mostly U.S. and European countries were kind of freaked out about it. One country that was not freaked out about it was Guatemala and the Mayan community. And this correlates to a couple of ideas here. One, in the Mayan community, they know their meaning of the word death and have kind of correlate to something else. They call it a step. The last day of the month is the step to the next one. And this is because you're talking about a community that has definitely believes in reincarnation, and therefore there is no end. So how this whole sort of pandemonium arose was a Western, I guess, astrologist or cosmologist had looked into this and saw that there was an end, and he came up with his own assumption before ever asking a Mayan day counter if this was in fact the end, because the people of the Mayan community were like, no, this is not the end. You just restart the calendar. Like, you just move on and keep going as normal. But of course, the West really freaked out because they didn't even ask that question. A little bit not, I guess, not so recent history anymore. But you can ask your parents about it. Like 2012, people were definitely freaked out for a bit. Not everyone, but you know, most people were not freaked out. But they were aware. It was on their mind that the Mayan calendar marked it as the end. Okay, so those are a little bit of several things. The last thing I want to give to you is a description of how the Mayan system works. This is why I have a clipboard out and a paper. I'm sure I could also draw it on the board, but I'm going to demonstrate something to you as well. As I said, the Mayan community counts with the entire body. The fingers and the toes are 20. But you can see other points in the body as well, and this correlates to the design and how they create their number system. And their number system is what you can see in these different figures all around. It's actually hiding in and above the design. And you're going to see this as well. So the thumb right here represents 0. So when you're counting in the Mayan number system, you always start with 0, whereas, you know, our culture still starts with the number 1. So technically, if you were to motion at someone across the room and you were to say there's nothing, like, you can actually say there's 0. So imagine that's a 0. And then the points of your fingers are 1, 2, 3, 4. Just like normal, you would hold that up, except for kind of angling it more towards, because it's the point that you're referring to. So in Mayan number system, I'm going to draw this out here, the thumb looks like this. So it's like sort of a sideways zero with a line through it. You'll see that in design a lot. And thus the fingers, you're thinking about the points of the fingers, not the lines. You know, we tend to, like in tallies, we tend to do strikes as 1, 1, 1, 1. The fingers are in fact dots. So at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, how do you represent 5, right? Normally we would do this, but you can really only go up to 4, and then else it doesn't make sense. So what next part of the body would you use to represent 5? Actually the arm, believe it or not. So holding up your arm horizontally like this, kind of with a fist, represents 5, which in design, in the calendar, the arm is a bar. So a little bit of math here. 2 dots in a bar. Looks kind of like a okay face. What number is that? Exactly, that's 7. Pretty simple, right? Okay, and therefore, I have 4 dots over 3 bars. What does that equal? 19, exactly. We get at a sticky point with the next number, though. So if your 20 is your base system, they have a much more efficient way of drawing 20. You have 1 complete, basically. So the first number, the 0, was incomplete, and this last number is complete. So 1 complete is a 20th. So like 1 true number. And then if you are to look at the calendar up close, this doesn't have a great vision of it because we're kind of just seeing a detail of the center. If you look on the days, you'll actually see the little symbols above and below, the dots and the circles and the lines to see what number things are, what's like your cosmic number, and what that day number is. Pretty cool. Okay, so that was a lot of words on this one. I like this piece a lot, though, and it's definitely worth looking at in history because you can really see that math crossover. So in the next slide right here, I've actually given you a video, a very short one. It's hard to find short ones, but I like it because you can actually see, they demonstrate to you how the calendars are moving. So if you want to click on that link and then just write one thing that has surprised you about this operation of a Mayan calendar. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, it looks like a bunch of years inside each other, and it kind of moves like that. So imagine the day counter would have a smaller version of these. There are paper ones now that you can get and print out for yourself, but you would just move one of these every day, rather than like crossing out or Xing off the calendar like we have over here in the West. Okay, so our cultural canons. There are other ways to measure time than just a calendar. So I want you to, or me and you, I have one that's actually very December specific that I'll put up here, but find a way that's different than the traditional calendar that we measure time. You can still have numbers and stuff on it. It's just not the normal Gregorian calendar. I'm going to put one right here. This is the Advent calendar. Depending on your religion, if you celebrate Christmas, it is a calendar that you open up the door every day in December. Can you think of a way to measure time that we do in the West? You can also tell it to me. If you write it on the board or write it in the box too, if the picture isn't coming out well. Oops, that's bad. Ooh. Yeah, that's perfect. We can also think like in our media as well, like in our even in our like school year, like we measure things as being school year versus summer vacation. We measure things as like the fall season, the spring season, and they don't always correlate with the actual seasons when we're watching TV, right? Different things too, like that. Like there's a wedding season every year. Based on what you're doing, we can measure time in different ways. Okay, so let's see. This is a modern artist right here. We are, there's one thing that I learned when I was in Guatemala. I kept using the word America a lot, and people took offense. And I was like, oh man, why are they so offended? And a translator came up to me and said, well, it's because it's a very USA way to think when we say America, because technically this entire hemisphere is America. There's North America, South America, Latin America, right? So Guatemala is as much America as the U.S. is, but how we tend to speak in the U.S. is we say America a lot. This is something that really caught my attention. And the Mayan community is by all means considered Native American. The similar ancestors to the Native Americans that are in the U.S. as well. So I have brought a current day artist here who is Native American and has a very interesting point of view. So here's a quote from him above. Nothing about what I do is a new perspective on Americanness. The artist's last name is Galinan. So Galinan told Mike, a newspaper, about how his work reflected on the perspective on what it means to be American. His work, he said, comes from a place that has known America before America decided to call this land America. And that, I thought, was a very clever wording of his. So my question here is, how is this artist catching your attention? How is Nicholas Galinan catching your attention with this piece? Yeah. U.S. flag bear rug for sure, right? In the bear rug, would you say that is, what does it make you think of, more of Native American culture or European culture? I'm curious. Native American. A lot of the fur trappers, when they came over to the U.S. from France and England, though, they took that custom for sure too. So the bear rug is very Native American. But he has some other details in here too. Like, look closely at the paws or the claws. If you can see that detail, I know it's hard to see, that it is in fact a flag, that's the body, and then he's sort of trimmed and made him look like some sort of felt outline. But those are actually bullets, some like giant bullets there. Yeah. So now he's with those bullets alone, he's directed you to a different opinion, right? It's one of those things that rewards you for looking closer later, because you're like, oh, wait a minute, wait a minute. You didn't technically even need to add those in there, but it does make the piece better, I think, to have that in there, because he's being more direct with his point of view. Do you think anything here is particularly negative? Has he, like, made a very negative statement? Or even a positive one? Not entirely, yeah. He's being kind of subtle, I feel. Yeah, he's kind of letting you decide, but he's laid out some clues here for you on what he's thinking. Do you think that he's caught a lot of attention by working in this way? Yeah. Well, he's using things that we all recognize, right? And they're all symbolic, right? The bullet, the flag, the bear, the skin rug. They're all symbolic, so you can put together sort of your own opinion on it. Cool. So this is his sort of Americana piece. And then moving on. Okay. So looking again at the Mayan calendar, I'll describe the style if you want to get the process here. We're going to give some notes to the people watching this video later. So the style, I'm going to say it's very, what's the word? Symbolic. Yeah. Yeah, because this is also a tool. That's a very good point to bring up. It took a lot of time to ensure accuracy. Okay. Give me a thumbs up if you're ready to move on. Cool. So compare and contrast. I will help you with this as well. We've got two very different pieces here this time. It'll be interesting to try and compare them. Ooh, good. I like that. Historical. Nice. Ooh, I got a good comparison here. Still a reference today. Cool. I think we got it. Give me a thumbs up if you're ready to move on again. Cool. Going forward. All right. So, what do you think something like the Mayan calendar? How has it impacted our art world or our actual world? And I think we're both hitting on it right here, but something I really learned from my time with the community and working in the schools and stuff is the effects of colonial way of thinking that we don't even realize that we have. European to non-European, West to anything but West, is that those cultures are in fact advanced and have so much brilliance and intelligence, but because they weren't considered civilized, all the accomplishments were sort of brushed away. So the reason why the study in the Mayan math systems and calendar and history, why it's come about again, is because we all of a sudden have this steady advancement in math and science and history and the universe and such, and we're realizing we're actually rediscovering a lot of things as humans because our ancestors didn't take, different people seriously because of what they didn't agree with those opinions. So it's interesting how we are relearning a lot of these lessons and materials in our own academic spheres, just because people weren't really interested in listening into these different ideas beforehand. So I have actually talked with my Mayan cosmologist named Daniel Matul, who readily travels around the world to work with different physicists and describes to a European or a Western person the Mayan way of thinking, because this man's fully bilingual and can do that. And he's also talking through advanced science and math with a person who understands advanced science and math. So a regular translator can't just do that. But I really think that when we have those thoughts that one culture is somehow not as good as another. We really need to see, like, what is the root of that thought, and is it coming from a colonist or a colonial area? For example, I didn't know much about Eastern Europe. Yeah, it totally disadvantages people, and you can actually see it happening around the world too. Like, if you don't know a lot about a culture and aren't interested in learning, you have to kind of ask yourself, wait a minute, why? I wasn't interested in Eastern Europe at all. I thought for a while, I didn't realize that I thought it was like a very a backwards area, seen as sort of run down. And then I actually was like, well, wait a minute, why do I have that resistance to learning about Eastern Europe? So I actually I don't know if you listened to any of the Great Courses lectures. They're like an audiobook sort of series, but they have some videos as well. They had one on Eastern Europe and Eastern European history, and it was incredibly interesting. And from that lecture series, I also learned that us thinking that Eastern Europe is backwards or not as advanced is entirely a devised thing. It was created mostly by Western and Russian politicians to sort of, to not take Eastern Europe seriously, and thus the whole world stopped taking Eastern Europe seriously, and they diminished in their power, sort of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. But it's so incredibly interesting when we actually dive into these cultures and learn a little bit more about them, and then kind of realize how devised it is that we don't know so much about them. So before we leave today, if you could tell me how this has impacted you, learning about this new piece of work, or any of the other works we saw today. Yes! That's fantastic. You have like a whole research paper right there. Fantastic, Elizabeth. You are a wordsmith. Thank you so much for joining me today, and on my birthday I feel like we've just had an art history party.